Welcome to the Cloud Accounting Podcast, a show for accountants and controllers using cloud technology to improve efficiencies and make their jobs more strategic and impactful. This podcast is brought to you by Flowcast. Flowcast is close management software created by accountants for accountants to help them close the books faster and more accurately. If you're interested in learning more about how close management software can cut the time it takes your team to close the books by 20% or more, check out Flowcast at floqast.com. I'm your host, Blake Oliver, and joining me for this episode is Chris Rose, the Vice President of Business Development at Sage Intacct. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
I was wondering if you could take a few minutes just to explain to our listeners what it is that you do at Intacct and what is Intacct all about?
Sure. Thank you. So my role at Intacct is I'm the Vice President of Business Development. So really, I'm focused on a number of key elements. The first is what we call our marketplace partners, and Flowcast is a very important and strategic marketplace partner for us, and that's our ecosystem of complementary application providers. Secondly, we look at some other organizations that may not be part of our marketplace, but are key application providers as well, people like Salesforce.com, ADP, American Express, for which or with which we have relationships both technical and company to company. And then last but not least, we really look within business development at finding ways to deliver what we call whole product. And so that's Reese McKinnon and Jeffrey Moore's whole product solutions. We look to deliver whole products as we enter new markets or continue to embrace verticals and micro verticals. And so that's our go-to-market strategy with regard to taking complementary products and engaging them with our prospective customers and current customers to deliver a whole product solution, because we're focused, as a best-in-class provider on finance and accounting, delivering extraordinary value as it relates to cloud-based accounting capabilities.
So that's something that you said, I should say, stuck with me, which is best in class, right? One of the big differentiators of a cloud product, a cloud ERP solution or general ledger solution versus an on-premises or desktop solution is the fact that you can connect it to so many things, right? And I was wondering, do you find that folks who switch to Sage Intacct are using more integrations? Is that one of the top features?
It is. And so, taking a step back or a step up, architecturally from day one, Sage Intacct was built with integration in mind. So the first version released, now almost 17 years ago, anticipated and actually fulfilled the requirement of integrating with other complementary applications like Salesforce.com. And so the cloud provides us some very unique capabilities that have continued to develop as it relates to integration. And so it really allows this debate that's age-old between suite and best-in-class to continue to play out in the marketplace. And so in our focus in the mid-market, what we find is that organizations, whether they be departmental or on an organizational-wide perspective, are looking for best-in-class applications. And the deployment as a true multi-tenant SaaS environment allows us to do that much more easily than we used to be able to do it. And it's not just as it relates to data, but it can also integrate workflow and other aspects of your solutions architecture. And so to your point, what we've found is close to 75% of our clients integrate with two or more applications today across our install base. So it's a big functional area that is not just required, but is how you get the significant benefits and returns on investment of moving to the cloud.
Oh, that's fantastic. I didn't realize it was so high, 75%. For our listeners for whom this is somewhat abstract. What would be an example of how data flows between applications? I know you mentioned Salesforce. Could you walk
Yeah,
us?
so yeah, sure. So if we look at Salesforce as a application that would have workflow between two systems, and traditionally Salesforce as a CRM or sales application would be considered the front office, and accounting is considered the back office. And so if you look at a workflow, if you look at the order to cash workflow, or even you can take it from lead to cash, all of the information as it relates to a prospective customer, that relationship is started within Salesforce. And so you start with a lead, your sales organization begins to qualify that lead, they move it forward into the sales process, they send a quote out, and that quote is where you begin the integration process. And so within Salesforce, you're going to be quoting on products, but you're going to have either a single instance of your product catalog or a mirror instance of your product catalog sitting in Intacct as well. And so as you quote, those products that you deliver in a quote will mirror the products that are in Intacct that would allow you to process that order once the quote is signed off on. And in many businesses today, that's a digital signature. And so I've quoted, I've put out an order schedule, that order schedule gets signed, and now it's an order to be turned into a transaction. And so the integration between Salesforce and Intacct allows that to automatically get processed. The invoice is generated by Intacct. The revenue recognition is automatically created, and that schedule is moved into your financials. And all the correspondent capabilities that Intacct has provided, we then update the Salesforce record so that your individual sales rep that may not be an Intacct user can see what's the invoice we sent, was it paid or not, was it sent correctly, what's the disposition of that client. They receive the product, and then in many organizations, Salesforce takes over in terms of customer support, and that same process can be mimicked on the support side working through Intacct. And so from the initial lead all the way to the cash that's collected by the customer, all of the workflows and, as importantly, data elements are shared between the two applications that have different user bases and have no duplicate data entry. It is one record that seamlessly flows through that workflow.
So that's fantastic, right? You're saving time first, and then you're also making sure that you don't have errors in the data.
Right. That's exactly the case. And so you're saving time in terms of data entry. You're significantly increasing the quality of the information that's within the system, and the additional benefits to users in terms of and companies in terms of other statistical data is that you see an increase in customer satisfaction because the invoices they get and the products they get are the ones that they ordered, and you see a improvement in day sales outstanding of cash because, again, if your invoice is correct, you have a much higher probability of paying the invoice versus if you get incorrect invoices, you're probably not going to pay your vendor, and so therefore the time it takes to collect cash increases over time. And so there's a bunch of attendant benefits that come together, not just the technical benefits and the cost-saving benefits of not needing to do double entry in two systems, but also in terms of the quality and the customer satisfaction.
So I'm a huge fan of all of this, especially the automation part, given how much I love technology and plugging apps together. But we should acknowledge that there is a potential dark side to all of this, which is automation eliminating jobs. So I'd like to call your attention to an article recently in Accounting Today. It seems that some of the state CPA societies have caught on to this trend over the last few years. Amy Pitter is the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Society of CPAs. She wrote this article recently claiming that, or citing a statistic that I believe to be true, based on my own experience, that robotics is expected to eliminate 40% of basic accounting work in the next few years. And that makes sense to me because as a bookkeeper, which I started as a bookkeeper, I was able to eliminate about 80% of that data entry work I was doing via similar automation techniques as to what you described, but on a simpler level, right? Not in the mid-market and the small accounting
Right.
world. But I see all those trends seem to be, rising up into the mid-sized companies, mid-market, with leaders like Intacct making this possible. So I'm wondering, this is sort of a long way of asking you, how do you feel about potentially being responsible for this automation of job?
Well, I think I think that the statistics that get thrown around, I think there's no question that technology across lots of different industries and lots of different job responsibilities either displaces or changes the responsibilities and the requirements of doing a specific job. I think that the 40% number is probably a little aggressive as it relates to individual people and robotics. I think where it's not aggressive and it's probably underestimating is transactions. And so in the same way you used to put paper on the desk of an accounting clerk to file your expenses, and that individual would then enter it into a system. Today, your particular time and expense module, let's say Nexonia or Expensify or other organizations, allow you to just digitize your full expense report by taking a photo of a receipt and having that become a digital expense report. And no one touches it. It goes through an approval matrix that allows for exceptions to be managed if there are exceptions to your expense report. And presto magic, you've put your routing number and account number, and it automatically gets deposited in your checking account once it's been approved by whatever level of employee at your organization needs to approve expenses. So that used to be, 5, 6, 7 people touching pieces of paper for you to get reimbursed. So those transactions have disappeared. I think the same level of or similar accounting transactions will continue to be automated on the front end of an accounting practice and accounting process, and then also on the back end, with AI and other capabilities as it relates to the audit process, where today transactions and discrete elements of closing the books are based on sort of statistical analysis of do I pull enough records to be convinced the processes are being handled correctly. Tomorrow, and actually today, many organizations are using AI to not take a statistical subset of transactions, but actually evaluate every transaction. And so those are the other kinds of places in which jobs will be repurposed. I say repurposed because I really believe that what happens is much like CFOs needing to become more and more strategic, I think your finance department will become much more data analytical versus being totally replaced, because you're still going to need experts in being able to understand what's taking place with regard to transactions, and most importantly, help guide an organization of what future investments, future risk, and future returns will look like from that information that's being gleaned.
Well, that is certainly appealing to think about the profession moving more toward that strategic level guidance and out of the busy work. I definitely myself would prefer to do that sort of job.
Well, other folks within the finance organization, and clearly, this has been a topic of conversation with regard to CFOs specifically for quite some time. Whether you look at, McKinsey or some of the big four have done studies for a number of years talking about the aspirations of CFOs moving from being primarily focused at the transaction level, looking historically and being a non-strategic participant, in the executive team, to something that significantly reduces, looking in the rearview mirror as your value add and becoming much more of having your time and your resources allocated to predictive and future decisions with regard to investment and risk allocation.
Well, sounds good to me. Chris, that's all our time today, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. Would you mind letting our listeners know what is the best way for them to one, connect to find out more about Sage Intacct, and two, to follow you online if you are one of those folks who likes to participate in social media?
So Sage Intacct, you can type just about anything with Intacct in it, and you'll find us on our website. That includes Sage Intacct or just Intacct by itself. I am on LinkedIn as Chris Rose. I actually don't know what my specific ID is, but I'm today not I don't Twitter, and so we'll leave it at either finding me at Sage Intacct or finding me on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. Sounds good. If you are interested in staying up to date on the latest in cloud accounting, please subscribe to my newsletter, Cloud Accounting Weekly, at cloudaccountingweekly.com. Topics include accounting technology, automation, remote work, managing a modern accounting team, and pretty much anything I find interesting as an accountant obsessed with using technology to make this profession more rewarding. Chris, thanks again, and I hope you and our listeners all have a great week.
Thank you very much.